If you are brand new to photography, one of the first things you need to learn is how shutter speed works. Today I'm going to give a quick rundown on everything you need to know to get started, so grab your camera and let's go. So shutter speed is one of 3 points on the exposure triangle. This is something that all photographers keep in mind when they're shooting, and each of these play an important role on creating a photo with proper lighting, proper detail, and a good focus on their subject. Today, we are ignoring aperture and ISO and diving right into shutter speed and how different speeds play an impact on your photos. So what exactly is shutter speed? The simplest way I can describe it is the measured time of an image. So shutter speed is typically labeled in fractions of a second. 1/100th of a second, 1/1000th of a second. And what this means is that your camera is capturing that moment in time for 1/1000th of a second. Whereas if you use a shutter 3 seconds long, your camera shutter is opening for 3 seconds and capturing that moment in time and putting it all into one image. The tricky part is figuring out when to use what shutter and what different shutter speeds do to your photo. So if we were to break up all the possible shutter speeds on a timeline, on the very left you would have something like 30 seconds, a 30-second long photo. And on the far right, you would have something like 1/50,000th of a second. And a helpful way to look at these is on the far left, these shutter speeds are going to emphasize your motion. And on the far right, these are going to freeze your motion. Now this is a wide range of shutter speeds, and in the middle there's different techniques that photographers can play with to accomplish movement in different ways. But this is a broad general idea of how shutter speeds can impact your movement. A really easy way to demonstrate this is to take pictures of water. If we use a high shutter speed, something like 1/2000, we can see individual particles of water being frozen in time. Now if we use a shutter speed much slower, we can really see the movement of the water in that picture. Now that photo is emphasizing the movement instead of freezing it. And so this is why a lot of photographers, if they're out shooting action shots or sports photography, they will use a high shutter speed to show that small moment of time where something exciting was happening. And then on the other side, often landscape photographers or long exposure photography will use much slower shutters to really emphasize the movement that is going on in an image. And then in the middle, we have something like panning photography, combining both edges of the line into one, where we are freezing the action of our subject, but showing the motion of the background. And that's something like 1/50th of a second, something that would sit right in the middle of our scale there. So these are the very basics of what shutter speed does to your image. But there are a couple things that you need to remember as you're experimenting with these different shutter speeds. The first is that if you are using a slow shutter speed, you have to have your camera anchored to something stable. If you are wanting to emphasize the movement of water coming down a waterfall, you can't be holding your camera with your hands. There's just natural shake that all of us have when we're holding our cameras, and that is going to interfere with the movement we are trying to portray through the water. The second thing you need to keep in mind when adjusting your shutter speeds is how much light is getting into your camera. If your shutter is open for 30 seconds, light is going to be entering into your camera during that whole time. These photos are a lot more overexposed, they're brighter. You have to adjust the other points of your exposure triangle to balance that out. I'll talk about those things in future videos, but that is something to keep in mind when you're taking your pictures. I hope this helps you get into photography and grow a bit in your understanding. Learning more about the technical aspects can definitely be helpful, but my best advice is always just to get out and shoot as much as you can. If you're interested in seeing my videos on aperture and ISO, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss when I post those. And I'll see you next week for a new video. Thanks for watching.